Begin. So you probably know, so mindfulness is sort of the big word that sort of, if people, and especially in the insight tradition and even in the culture at large, if people know, I used to say, if people knew one Buddhist term, it was karma. But I think mindfulness has surpassed it. I think if the general public were to know one term associated with Buddhism, they probably know the word mindfulness. So this word sati, mindfulness, which is really, it's such a big aspect of practice. It's really the whole of the practice. So much can be said about mindfulness. And then, the question sort of becomes, well, mindfulness of what? Mindfulness of what? And then we have these four satipatthanas in the teachings of the Satipatthana Sutta, these mindfulness of the body sensations, the forms of the body, feelings, mental states, and various frames of reference. And so what to do with that, And then, as you probably have gathered in your reading and study, it doesn't take long to, especially in this tradition, the insight tradition, it doesn't take very long before you start to realize there's lots of lists. And one can think, well, what am I supposed to do with these stupid lists? There's all these lists. Am I supposed to memorize these lists? Am I supposed to learn them? Are they related to each other? How are they related to each other? Is this a list of practices? Is this a list of belief systems? What's going on here? It's a good question to ask, and it's a good question to answer, because it's really that's how the Dharma has been delivered to us, for good, bad, or otherwise. We kind of just end up with this big set of lists, and so we want to try to find a way to integrate these lists. And I think that's really what I've been doing for the last 10 years, is trying to find practical ways of bringing these practices and these teachings really to life, and really to my day and to the moments of my life, so that it's not conceptual or a theoretical thing, right? And I think that's when you think about what wisdom is, this word wisdom, which for years and years and years, if you really challenged me, if you told me what was wisdom, I wouldn't really be able to give you much of an answer. It's one of these terms, wisdom is one of these terms, everybody sort of knows what it is, and at the same time, everybody has no idea what it is. It's this word that we kind of can throw around. It's obviously an important word, and it's a word wisdom is something that most of us would like to have. And so how do you go about acquiring said wisdom? So wisdom actually in the Pali discourses is really, really defined as a stage. And it's really, so the first one is there's the conceptual stage. There's the ideas. We hear these ideas, right? So there is an aspect of that we can't deny. There's an intellectual, conceptual aspect. Does this make sense? Does this sound worthwhile? Is this in line with using logic and reasoning and critical thinking and all these great tools that we have? But that's not it. And then when we start to see mindfulness, oh, that sounds good. I've read about it. I've heard podcasts about it. I'm interested in it. And then we apply the teaching, or we apply that concept against lived experience or against reality. And then by doing so, we have fruition. We discern for ourselves. And the Buddha asks you to discern for yourself, to not take his word for it. So if I take this concept and I apply it towards my direct experience, through an application, through a practice, really. And if I find that the results are favorable, then I'm encouraged to cultivate that and to bring that into being. And if I find that the results are unfavorable, then I'm to abandon that and to let that go. And this is meant to be done in the personal laboratory of my own direct experience. So this is for each of us to do. So the Buddha, so none of these lists really are belief systems. I don't think the Buddha is big on belief. He's big on behavior. So the other thing about the Four Noble Truths is they're kind of, because of the word noble truth, let's just be honest, the word noble truth sounds very belief system-y to me. In fact, to hear the word noble truth, as somebody who's not a huge fan of religion in general, the word noble truth actually makes me cringe slightly. I don't particularly like that. What does it mean? What does something mean to be nobly true? That sounds a little bit, I don't know, maybe that throws you off. And it sounds like the Buddhist version of the 10 Commandments in some way. So, when so it's not so much that they're true or that they're noble, it's that the Buddha is saying, can you be aware of these things? So mindfulness of the Four Noble Truths is really what we're going to be looking at. And so, and they also do appear and there's debate on this, but they do appear in the Theravada Satipatthana Sutta, which everybody seems to be a big fan of. There's lots of, in the last decade or so, there's been lots of books and lots of writings and lots of discussion on this very sort of famous, profound text. It's probably, at this point, it's to some degree the Bible of the insight tradition. It's really the revered text. If you go to IMS, if you sit a retreat at IMS, mostly they're teaching Satipatthana, which is good. Satipatthana is pretty trustworthy practice. In the fourth foundation of mindfulness, and the fourth, which is hard to discern, what is it? Because it's mindfulness of dhammas, is how it's technically put. So it's mindfulness of dharmas. And I always thought, well, what the hell does that mean? You know, I thought I was trying to be mindful of the Dharma the whole time. But what is this Dharma that they're talking about? These set of lists. We get 5 sets of lists. And I really think, actually, and it's almost embarrassing to say, but usually when we say Dharma, we associate the Dharma with the Buddhist teachings, right? That's probably the most common association. Well, the Dharma, that's what the Buddha taught, that's his teachings. So I really think the fourth foundation of mindfulness is asking us and encouraging us to be mindful of the teachings, mindful of the hindrances. That's the teaching in the fourth foundation of the mindfulness. Can I be mindful? Can I be aware in the context of my life? Can I be aware of when I'm getting caught up in attachment and aversion, when I'm getting caught up in restlessness and anxiety, when I'm getting caught up in lethargy and kind of disinterest, when I'm getting caught up in doubt? Because if I'm aware of these things, I can see that they're blocking me. They're cutting me off from flourishing. They're cutting me off from having the life that I want to have. So the Buddha thing will be, keep these things in mind. The way to think about mindfulness here is to bear in mind that you're likely to get caught up in the hindrances probably every day. So you want to bear that in mind. And then you have the awakening factors, which is, the list of 7 awakening factors, which, no surprise, starts with mindfulness and ends and accumulates with equanimity. And so the Buddha will also be aware of these. Be aware of these hindrances, see if you can overcome these hindrances. Be aware of these awakening factors, see if you can be aware of these awakening factors and cultivate those. And if that's all you did, I think you'd probably really get a lot of bang for the buck. I think if all you did in your life was to try to be aware of the hindrances and overcome them, and aware of the awakening factors and develop them, you could chuck everything else out and you probably would accomplish quite a lot. Right. So if you really boil down the fourth foundation of mindfulness, and Bhikkhu Analayo talks about this in his second book, he says the task of the fourth foundation of mindfulness is to develop and to be aware of our progress on the path by abandoning the hindrances and cultivating the awakening factors. So that's what we're at. But then you get this next list, this last list inside of the Theravada Satipatthana is the list of the Four Noble Truths, which is kind of odd. It really feels like, and also from an academic perspective, it's probably likely they added that in later on because that's such a front and center teaching. But let's take it seriously and say, well, what does that actually look like? So, one of the people I work with, one of my friends and teachers, Stephen Batchelor, talks about the noble truth as actually not being so much nobly true, but they're actually tasks. They're little mindfulness tasks. They're practices to exercise. So we would look at, so if you look at it, and this is right in the canon, I actually could pull this up here for you. I think I saved it on the screen. So if you look at the canon, if you really look at the Buddha, actually, he defines each noble truth, and then he gives you a little task to do. So he says with the first one, he says dukkha. We all know dukkha. He says this is dukkha. Birth, old age, sickness, and death is dukkha. When you don't get what you want, that's dukkha. When you get what you lose the things you care about, that's dukkha. Separation from what you like, coming into contact with what is unpleasant and unfavorable. This is dukkha. And so he describes what it is. And then he tells you it can be fully known. It has been fully known. So the task of the first truth, let's say, is from a mindfulness perspective, in really simple terms, is about embracing life. The alcoholics have this down pat when they say life on life terms. We're trying to live life on life's terms, right? We're trying to participate and to try to live into reality, and be in that experience. And so so that requires some awareness, that requires some kindness, it probably requires some compassion to embrace birth, old age, sickness, and death, and to embrace these aspects of life is really challenging, as I'm sure you've gathered. And so the Pali term for fully know, and I'm not so sure, I like this word embrace. Fully know comes from the Pali, which is parinya. Nya, it means to know. So in Pari, we're not really sure what that means, but that's kind of like a complete kind of knowing. But it's not. This is here again. This is too cognizant. It's not just about knowing that you're going to get old and die, and that your people you love are going to die, and that you're not going to get what you want, and you're going to often get what you don't want. We all sort of know that. That's what's really so profound about this. Is you could interview people coming out of the local Walmart, and they're all going to agree with you. Say, yeah, sometimes you don't get what you want. Sometimes, this is like really basic stuff. And really, this is the dukkha of life, and so we really want to try to embrace that. So when you look at the foundations of mindfulness, it's really about embodiment. It's about living with presence. It's about being in the body, because what gets sick and old and was born is that we actually live in the body. That's our primary vehicle. We live in the body-mind system. You think you live in Bozeman, Montana, but you actually live inside your body-mind system first. That's ground zero. That's where that's where it's all happening. It's all happening right in here, right? And I find myself challenged by that. I find myself not wanting the experience to be the way that it is. I find that things feel out of place. Sometimes things just, I don't know about you, but I oftentimes feel like things are just off a bit. Things aren't quite right. And this is all just aspects of dukkha, right? And it's really difficult. And so he talks about that's the first mindfulness practice, is to be, and that's why all of the mindfulness trainings: be in your body, be in your feelings, be in your mind states, be in your experience. Even though it's hard and challenging, it can be done. And the Buddha says, I ask you to do it only because it's possible. And if it were not possible, I would not ask you to try. Right. And so, we go on these retreats, we go to these classes, we sit every day, we spend a lot of time trying to be inside the body system with the breath and all of its things. And we find that, we would almost rather be anywhere else but the body or this moment. It's sort of the funny thing about it. And then he goes on to describe tanha, this word usually translated as craving. He says, this is the arising. It is craving, which is repetitive, wallowing in attachment and greed, obsessively indulging in this and that. I love this translation. Do you ever find yourself obsessively indulging in this and that? Whatever this is and whatever that is, I'm just kind of repetitively, obsessively indulging in this and that and the other. And so what he's saying is this is what's arising. So he's not saying that it's causing the dukkha. The whole craving causing the dukkha thing. Let me just be clear as a public service announcement. That language is nowhere in the Pali Canon. That's much later. Okay. Dukkha, dukkha is ground zero. And what happens is, because it's so hard to be in here, craving arises and says, hey man, you don't have to be in this moment. Let's obsessively indulge in this and that. Let's cut off. Let's cut off into the past, into the future, and fixing and changing and avoiding and controlling and what ifing and only ifing and all this we do. We go elsewhere. We proliferate, right? And we kind of suffer, and we're not tuned into our life, and we feel incomplete in that experience. So it's not so much as about like whether or not we could call that suffering. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Whatever it is, it's not certain. It's not helping. And it's not how we want to live. It's getting in the way. It's blocking us. It's hindering you. That's why they call them the hindrances. This craving thing is really much more of a hindrance than it is a cause of something. It's an outcome. And the Buddha says, such is the arising. It can be let go of. It has been let go of. So the concept is, here's what this arising is. It's obsessively indulging in this and that. Here's what it is. This is the concept. The application is like, you can let go of this. You can recognize that you're caught up. You can recognize craving and aversion and these hindrances. You can recognize these things and you can let them go. You can let them be. You can overcome them. You can be free from that. And then the third aspect of the wisdom is that task has been accomplished. And we find that when we've done that, we feel good, we feel connected, we feel confident, we feel all these awakening factors, we feel all these 26 beautiful factors in the Abhidharma. We're getting all the cash and prizes. And, you know, they're not necessarily epic in a sense, but we are tuned in, right? And then he goes on to say, this is the ceasing, the traceless fading away and cessation of that craving, of that tanha, the letting go of it and the abandoning of it, freedom and independence from it. Now notice it doesn't say letting go of and overcoming dukkha, which is the standard understanding. It says traceless fading away, letting go and abandoning of the craving, of the tanha, of the reactivity, freedom and independence from it. So it's dukkha is not the problem, it's tanha, reactivity, that's actually the problem. Dukkha is the fixed term. If you look at this as a mathematical equation, the fixed term is dukkha, and the variable terms are tanha and nibbana. The tanha arises and falls away, just like the nibbana arises and falls away. And if we can do this mindfulness thing, we can experience this kind of nibbana, which is not the end of suffering; it's the end of reactivity. And it's not that the Eightfold Path leads to Nibbana, it's that Nibbana is the doorway into the Eightfold Path, which is kind of backwards from the understanding. And I've spent years and years trying to figure that out. And I'm very happy that I finally said, well, let me take a look at the text and see what that actually says. So, and then he goes on to say, this is the path. And it is just this noble eightfold path, you know, the right view, right intention, right action, livelihood, you know the list. And he says that the path can be cultivated. This is the path. It can be cultivated, and it has been cultivated. So the goal here, of course, with mindfulness is to cultivate the eightfold path. That's what we're doing, right? And no one's going to argue with that. You know, you could sit down with Buddhists from any tradition, any lineage, and no one's going to argue that the goal, the soteriological goal or the salvific goal of Dharma practice is the cultivation of the Eightfold Path. You're not going to get a lot of pushback on that one. And so that's a mindfulness practice. You have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of these possibilities. You know, we can cultivate views and we can cultivate the mind. We can cultivate intentionality. We can cultivate voice. We can cultivate our work and our action, and we can cultivate effort. These things are cultivatable, right? They're here. And so with mindfulness, it's so interesting. You really want to see the Eightfold Path as actually each of them is a kind of mind state. Mindfulness and right view, mindfulness and right intention, mindfulness and right speech. There's a practice for you. Try to be fully tuned in and fully embraced and aware of the words that are coming out of your mouth while you're talking. Finding one's voice, right? So they're mindfulness practices. They're actually, I think, in many ways, they're mind states. And so when we start to, and so even if we just back up before he goes through this, he talks about this middle way. It is just this noble eightfold path. So he wakes up to this kind of middle way experience. And he talks about this is a middle way between extremes, between these dead ends, between eternalism and nihilism. So really the Dharma is really a correlator to this idea of a middle path, a middle way of living in this world. And so when you look at, if you just back into the fourth foundation a little bit, we can see that dukkha is in the body and then the feelings. Like we can't do much about the body, we can't do much about feelings, right? Like if I have an unpleasant feeling, I need to embrace these first two foundations, need to be embraced. I embrace the pain of the body, the nervous system, the emotional body, the feelings. This is all, I don't have a lot of agency over my body. Tell your body to not get sick. You tell your body to not get old. Tell your unpleasant feeling to not be unpleasant anymore. This is just how it is. And then in the third and fourth foundation of mindfulness, this is where we are either caught up in greed, hatred, and confusion and the hindrances, or we are developing awareness and mindfulness, and we're developing these awakening factors. And then the really thing that can help us recircle this. So this is really, the path is kind of more circular. It's more actually like, what do they say? Shinzen Young has a good explanation of it. He says the path is algorithmic, which means that it loops, it goes around and round, and it branches. That's what an algorithm does. It goes round and round and it branches. So we kind of, we come back to the breath, we get a kind of circular motion with our practice. And then the branching out is like, okay, am I heading out into these hindrances? Am I getting caught up in attachment and aversion and greed? And if I am, let's get back into this. Right? Let's not do that. Let's go this other way. And if I practicing and I'm finding I'm having some mindfulness and some interest and some kindness and some contentment, then let's develop that. And that's kind of, even moment to moment, that's kind of what we're up to. And you're already all doing this anyway, right? This is probably, hopefully not a big eye opener. This is kind of what's going on anyway. But when you tie these threads together and you really start to think of these, my practice shifted really pretty profoundly when I started to really take on the noble truth as mindfulness tasks to perform, as something that I'm being challenged to do, as a kind of injunction. See if you can notice this, see if you can embrace this, see if you can let go of that, see if you can cultivate this, right? And then, so when we think about nibbana, which is a term that I think has gotten put on a very much unneeded pedestal. If you really want to look at it a bit more from the Theravada lens, actually, you can download a free PDF by a really prolific, actually quite famous Theravada monk named Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was the founder of Swan Mok, which is a monastery in southern Thailand. And he wrote a pamphlet in the 80s called Nibbana for Everyone. It's great. You can download. It's like 26 pages. It's not one of these like gnarly Dharma reads. It's pretty easy. And he was really trying to get back to like this Nibbana thing is like really right here all of the time. And it actually is as soon as you overcome that reactivity, as soon as you overcome the hindrances, what happens in the space is you actually come into a Nibbanic space, which an easy way to say that is you come into a non-reactive awareness. You're open to Kamala Masters has this best definition of equanimity, where we're opening to everything and we're reacting to none of it. Imagine being open to everything and not reacting to any part of it, And so nibbana, equanimity, these mindfulness, dharma, these words are all kind of synonymous. And then from that space, from a space of non-reactivity, then I'm able to really, really cultivate a path, to cultivate a lifestyle. I'm able to flourish. I'm able to live in a way that's in line with my values, and that's what we want. So nibbana is sort of the entry point. It's really the trailhead, actually. This word trailhead, you go for a hike, you start at the trailhead. Nibbana is the trailhead, right? That's where we start. And then we take our various paths and our various ways in which we travel and traverse the world. And that's sort of how that goes. I have a little bit of time, so I'm going to show you this. So I want to show this to you because I just got it and I'm very excited about it. And to just highlight something that's coming up the next couple of years, because I know the crew in Bozeman, so I'm happy to show this to you. Can you make me a host so I can share my screen? Some of you probably know I've been working with my friend Stephen Batcher on this program that we've developed that we're gonna start probably offering next year, called MBEL, which stands for Mindfulness-Based Ethical Living. And what mindfulness-based ethical living is, it's kind of like secular mindfulness with the Pali Canon. So it's getting away from some of the Buddhism stuff, some of the hierarchy of the teacher-student thing, some of the mystical stuff, a lot of the stuff that's kind of esoteric. We kind of just politely put that aside, and using this as a way for people, because a lot of people who have done secular mindfulness, they've done MBSR, they've done some mindfulness, there's really nowhere to go after that. It's kind of like, where do you go from here? So this is a bit of where you go from here. And he's done this great job of talking about these four aspects of mindfulness as they relate to the Four Noble Truths. So if you can see my screen. So, the first one is dukkha, right? The first task is mindfulness is of an existential nature, paying close attention to one's life situation, paying close attention to our bodies and our feelings, our mind states, our ideas, in support of cultivating effort, resolve, creativity. So and really, I think Dharma for a lot of us is a bit of an existential dilemma, right? We know we've been born, we know we're going to get sick, we know we're going to die, and we know we have limited time on this earth. And this is a very existential experience that we have. And what do we want to do about that? What do we want to do with this life? And a lot of times, a lot of us, I know for me, like that's what got me into practice in the first place, because I was really confused about that for much of my life. I didn't know why I was here, what I was supposed to be here. It seemed like being here was too painful. Terrible things happen. There's all this trauma and all this terrible things in the world. And for years and years of my life, I didn't even really want to be here. This just seemed too hard. So when the first task is to really embrace this existential body, this person living in the world, and how do I be this person? And so that's really mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings. The second one, and I like this word, the second aspect of mindfulness in relationship to these tasks or truth is of a therapeutic mindfulness, is a way of looking at our mind and our reactivities and really looking at the ways in which we react to everything, inner experience, outer experience. And this taking this on, overcoming our reactivity takes confidence, it takes courage, it takes focus, it takes discernment. To really wake up to some of the ugly and maybe not so pretty aspects of your own psychology and say, I really want to be free of this. So there's a therapeutic aspect to this work. And this is a lot of what we're doing. This feels like a lot of the work that I've done, not just in my Dharma practice, but in therapy work, is really trying to let go of, recognize my reactivity, and I really find that if I track my sense of freedom internally, it's really been a result of letting go of like reactivity, reacting to views and ideas, reacting to other people's opinions about things. I mean, how often do we react to that? And then the third aspect, or really you could even say the third foundation of mindfulness, the third truth, nibbana, is a mindfulness of a contemplative nature. And the Zen tradition really got this one down, so that when we practice mindfulness on the cushion, what we're doing is we're trying to be mindful and to dwell and to abide and to sit into a mind that's non-reactive. That's a lot of what we're attempting to do. That's a lot of the work that we do on the cushion, is trying to create those conditions, right? And this allows for different things to emerge. This is the fading away. So as soon as we let go, even moment to moment, as soon as we let go of that reactivity, then we find ourselves in this space where we feel equanimous, we have focus, we have stillness, joy, enthusiasm. These awakening factors start to sit there, right? So this is the contemplative side of it. And then the last one, and I think that the secular mindfulness people and a lot of people who have used and worked with mindfulness in maybe a non-Buddhist context will find, will be pleased to see that there's actually this ethical aspect of mindfulness. And this is concerned with how we live in the world, focus on what we do, how we treat ourselves, how we treat other people, how we talk to each other, how we act, how we live. That can really be a kind of creative sense of really developing empathy and compassion, motivation for how we can really find our voice, live in the world. So these are different ways of thinking about the practice, right? There's an existential domain of practice. I'm here, I'm in this world. What's it like to be here? What do I want to do with this life? There's the therapeutic side of, I look inside my mind and I want to overcome and let go of these things. I want to overcome these hindrances. I want to overcome my reactivity. And when I do that, I want to be I feel like a lot of times what Dharma work is I really want to live a contemplative life. I want to live a life that's guided by a contemplative framework, right? And guided by a sense of non-reactivity. And then I want to live with purpose, but I want to do it ethically. I want to embrace the teachings of harmlessness. I want to try to be harmless. I want to try to practice renunciation. I want to have an ethical relationship to my world, to my environment, to all of these things. And so they all They all kind of add up in this way. So, this is a kind of a big thing, right? This is sort of a big deal. This isn't some little add-on. And to me, this is really a nice way to capture in a way that's actually pragmatic, a way that feels like, I feel like I can do this. This feels possible. And I think that for a lot of us, it's really important that the practice feels possible. The practice feels like something that's alive for us. The practice, the path becomes alive. It's not this analogy I use a lot. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of it. But a lot of us, we live in what I call Star Wars Dharma. We think the Dharma was in a galaxy, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was enlightened people who were happy, and it definitely ain't us. So we have this tendency to like park the dharmic goal way out and in the future, right? And then what happens is we feel disconnected from that. We feel a sense of incomplete, and then we can feel a sense of pressure of like, oh, I need to do this right. I need to do this correct. And that's a really, as somebody who's lived in that dynamic for a long time, it's a really confusing, painful, doubtful place to be. So we really want to try to, the foundations of mindfulness, very, very central aspects of Dharma, being in our body, our feelings, our minds, our ideas, and doing that with a way like there's something that needs to be done here, right? There's a very specific task, right? And then by doing that, if that's all you do, I think you're probably going to be okay. That's just like enough, right? And then we're just back to hindrances and awakening factors. So everything circles around. So even like what I'm doing tonight is I'm talking about these concepts, and I'm just looping these ideas, and I'm branching out and pulling some stuff in that might be helpful. But the key is just to remember this looping process of, okay, like I'm here. Can I be in my body? Can I be in a sense of non-reactivity? Can I bring a sense of kindness to myself? That's pretty good. That's helpful. Be with that. Soak into that. And then trust that, as these ideas branch out and these concepts branch out, you'll get to where you're headed, right? You'll get there. And so this gives us a nice framework for how we can practice by using really I would probably argue, the two of the most essential teachings are the teachings on mindfulness and the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. And so if we can bring these two together in a kind of union and an integration, then we know that we're really covering good ground. So what we'll do now, so thank you for your kind attention. I appreciate that. I'm going to guide you through a practice. So now we'll see if we can actually practice everything I just said. And I even, I encourage you to challenge everything I just said and say, okay, like, is this happening for you too? Don't take my word for it, right? Do you see this in your experience? And so now we can really practice mindfulness of these Four Noble Truths, if you don't mind that word. I don't like it so much, but we're stuck with it. But really thinking mindfulness, there's 4 tasks we're going to practice. We're going to practice these tasks on a moment-to-moment thing. So we want to realize that mindfulness is a moment-to-moment skill. Nibbana is a moment-to-moment skill. Equanimity is a moment-to-moment skill. A lot of these things are just skills that we just develop moment by moment by moment. That's it. It's really that simple, actually. So we'll walk through these 4 foundations and these 4 tasks, and we'll just see what the outcome is, right? See what happens. See what happens when we do this. So you can just find a comfortable way to sit as best you can, if you can do that. And I'll start and end with the bell. And if you do hear, I'll mute as best I can. If you hear barking dogs or screaming children, that's me. Because that's what's going on downstairs. So if you hear that, it's not in your house. There's no screaming children in your house, at least not that I know of. And so we'll start and end with the bell.